Every family has secrets. Some we whisper about, others we bury deep enough to forget. But what happens when the silence is shattered by a scream in the night? When the people we love become strangers, and a single act of violence rips through everything we thought we knew? Welcome to Family House Murder, a haunting journey into the heart of a family torn apart by tragedy. It begins with the unthinkable, a young girl murdered in her own home, and unravels into something far more complex. As grief consumes the Collins family, long-hidden tensions rise to the surface. A mother clings to hope, a father runs from guilt, a sister uncovers painful truths, and a brother, well, some wounds never heal cleanly. This is not just a murder story. It's a story about love in the face of loss, about anger, betrayal, and the fight to reclaim what's been broken. Because sometimes the real mystery isn't what happened. It's what was already happening long before the crime. So settle in, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, how well do you really know the people you call family? The morning began with a soft drizzle, the kind that barely kissed the skin but left the world slightly blurred, like a watercolor painting just starting to run. The house stood at the end of the lane, a two-story Victorian with ivy crawling up its faded gray walls. It was the sort of house that had seen too much and said too little. Inside, the Collins family stirred, unaware that today would break them in ways they had never imagined. Eleanor Collins, the matriarch, stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes with a quiet rhythm. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where raindrops streaked the glass like tears. Her husband, Richard, had left early for work, as he always did, or so he had told her. Lately, she had begun to suspect that his early departures were less about work and more about avoidance. Something had shifted between them, though neither had dared to name it. Upstairs, their eldest daughter, Caroline, sat at her vanity brushing her hair. At 26, she had returned home after a failed engagement and a career that never quite took off. She avoided the mirrors around the house, preferring instead to study the cracks in the ceiling or the uneven seams of the wallpaper. It was easier than seeing what she had become, disappointment carved in soft skin and tired eyes. Across the hall, Luke, the youngest of the three children, played a video game with the volume turned low. At 17, he was tall and quiet, often mistaken for being aloof when, in truth, he was simply observant. He heard everything in the house, the fights, the silences, the sighs behind closed doors. He stored them like ammunition, unsure when or if he'd ever use them. And then there was Rachel. Rachel, the middle child, the fire in the family's cold hearth. 22, brilliant, bold and broken in ways even she didn't fully understand. She had always been the one who said what everyone else was thinking but dared not say. This morning, she was nowhere to be found. Her bed was made, her phone on the nightstand. That alone was strange. Rachel never went anywhere without her phone. By noon, Eleanor was pacing the living room, her unease growing. Richard hadn't returned any of her calls. Caroline was staring blankly at the television, and Luke had taken to his room, headphones in, eyes hidden behind the glare of a screen. "Where's Rachel?" Eleanor asked suddenly, her voice breaking the dull hum of the afternoon. Caroline looked over, her brows knitting. "Probably out with that guy again, the one with the motorcycle." "Lucas," Eleanor frowned. "She broke up with him weeks ago." "Then maybe she just needed to get out of this house," Caroline muttered, bitterness lacing her voice. Eleanor's concern deepened. She picked up Rachel's phone and scrolled through it. No recent texts, no new calls, no social media posts. Not even a draft message. Rachel wasn't one to disappear quietly. It was evening when they found her. Luke, hungry and restless, had decided to take a walk in the backyard. The rain had stopped and the garden looked heavy with moisture, the air thick with the scent of earth and wet grass. He walked past the apple tree, past the rusted swing set, and then stopped. Something red was poking from the base of the old woodshed. At first, he thought it was a scarf. It wasn't. Luke screamed, a raw animal sound that brought Eleanor running, Caroline behind her. When she saw her daughter's body, Rachel's lifeless form crumpled like a broken doll against the shed, Eleanor collapsed. Caroline's scream was silent, mouth open, no sound escaping, her hands trembling violently. Rachel was dead. The police arrived quickly, yellow tape wrapped around the backyard like a grotesque ribbon. Forensic teams moved in a choreographed silence, collecting, documenting. A young detective named Ava Moreno took the lead, her expression unreadable but her eyes scanning everything. She approached the family, now huddled in the living room like survivors of a shipwreck. "I'm very sorry for your loss," she said gently. "We're going to do everything we can to find out what happened." Richard arrived just as Ava was finishing her initial questions. His face went pale when he saw the squad cars, then even paler when he saw Eleanor's tear-streaked face. "What happened?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. "It's Rachel," Eleanor said. She's gone." The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Over the next few days, grief settled over the Collins house like fog. Rachel's room was sealed pending investigation. The media caught wind of the story. "Young woman found dead in family backyard," the headlines read. Friends and neighbors offered condolences, casseroles, and awkward silences. But beneath the grief, something darker simmered. Suspicion. Detective Moreno noticed it immediately. "There's tension in this family," she told her partner, Officer Grant. "A lot of secrets. It's like the murder cracked open a shell and everything's spilling out." She wasn't wrong. Caroline, for instance, had been fighting with Rachel for weeks. Jealousy, mostly. Over attention, over past mistakes. They had shouted the night before Rachel died, voices echoing down the hall. Caroline had said things she couldn't take back. Eleanor was hiding something too. In her journal, found tucked under a loose floorboard in the master bedroom, she had written about Rachel's emotional outbursts, her accusations, her threats to reveal everything. But what was everything? Richard's alibi was thin. He claimed to have been at a business meeting in another town, but there were no receipts, no calls, no confirmation. When pressed, he became defensive, even angry. Luke, the quiet one, became even quieter. He refused to speak to the police, even with a parent present. He was terrified, but of what? As Detective Moreno dug deeper, the facade of the perfect family crumbled. There were financial troubles. Richard had lost his job 6 months ago and hadn't told anyone. They were living off savings and loans. Eleanor had been taking medication for anxiety, the kind that made her foggy and forgetful. Caroline had been drinking heavily, sometimes blacking out. And Rachel had discovered something she wasn't supposed to know. In her diary, found hidden in a shoebox beneath her bed, she had written cryptic notes. "He's lying. I saw the emails." Mom knows more than she says. "If something happens to me, look at them first." Detective Moreno knew this wasn't just a random act of violence. Rachel had been killed by someone close, someone who had everything to lose. One night, Caroline broke. "I didn't kill her," she said, sobbing at the dining table, "but I hated her. God help me, I did." Eleanor tried to comfort her, but Caroline pulled away. She knew about Dad. She found out about the woman. "What woman?" Eleanor asked, her voice a trembling thread. "The one he's been seeing. In Clearwater, Rachel found messages on his laptop." Eleanor felt her heart shatter anew. All these years of loyalty, of forgiveness, and it had meant nothing. Detective Moreno now had motive. She requested Richard's devices, and what they found confirmed the affair. But it also revealed something else, threatening emails from Rachel to her father. "I'll tell Mom. I'll tell everyone." The timeline was tightening. Rachel had confronted her father. Had he snapped? When questioned again, Richard finally cracked. "Yes, I was angry," he admitted. "But I didn't kill her. I left. I drove for hours. I needed space." "Did anyone see you?" Moreno asked. "No?" "Then you have no alibi." Silence. The family unraveled. Eleanor stopped sleeping. Caroline started taking her mother's pills. Luke barely left his room. The house, once filled with arguments and noise, now echoed with absence. But Detective Moreno kept digging. One afternoon, she visited the local library, following a trail Rachel had left in her internet history. Rachel had been researching adoption laws, DNA testing. She had printed pages of legal documents. At first, it didn't make sense. Then the librarian remembered something. She asked about sealed birth records, the woman said. Said she thought she wasn't who she thought she was. The truth hit like a thunderclap. Rachel believed she wasn't a Collins by blood. DNA confirmed it. She had been adopted as a baby, secretly, after Eleanor's first child had died in childbirth. A desperate decision, never spoken of again. Richard hadn't wanted the world to know, neither had Eleanor. But Rachel had found out and confronted them. "She said she felt like a stranger," Eleanor whispered when confronted. "I didn't know how to fix it." Rachel's death was no longer just a tragedy. It was the final link in a chain of lies, stretching back decades. But still, who killed her? There was one person no one had considered. Luke. Quiet, observant Luke. Detective Moreno returned to the woodshed, walked the path he had taken. Something nagged at her. The way he had described finding the body. Too specific. Too calm. She visited his room, looked through his sketchbooks. They were filled with drawings of Rachel, distorted, angry, screaming. She found a knife hidden in the closet. Forensics confirmed it. Luke had snapped. Overlooked, ignored, filled with silent rage. He had followed Rachel that morning. They had argued about the adoption, the secrets, the family. She had threatened to leave to expose everything. He had panicked. He hadn't meant to kill her. But he did. Luke was transferred to a juvenile detention facility pending trial. His lawyers planned to argue diminished capacity, emotional trauma, mental instability, the pressure of family dysfunction. Moreno didn't protest. She'd seen enough broken boys in her time to know that monsters weren't born in a vacuum. They were made by silence, by neglect, by secrets buried too deep. The Collins house went quiet after that. No more police visits, no more reporters camped on the street. The neighbors stopped whispering, but the damage lingered, like smoke after a fire. Eleanor tried to reclaim routine. She cleaned Rachel's room one item at a time, folded clothes that would never be worn again, dusted shelves holding memories that no longer belonged to anyone. She cooked dinner even though no one ate it. She wrote letters to Luke and burned them in the fireplace. Carolyn checked herself into a rehab clinic upstate, detoxed, met therapists, really talked, for the first time in years. She said Rachel's name during one session and cried until her chest hurt. She started journaling, sketching, thinking about leaving the house, maybe even the town, for good. Richard resurfaced in another city. He emailed Eleanor once. No subject line, only one sentence. "If there's anything I can do for Luke, I'll do it." She didn't reply. The months passed slowly. On what would have been Rachel's 23rd birthday, Eleanor stood in the backyard in front of the now empty space where the shed once stood. They'd torn it down. She scattered wildflower seeds in the soft earth and whispered her daughter's name into the wind. That night, a knock came at the door. Detective Moreno stood there, umbrella in hand, rainwater dripping from her coat. She held a small box. "I thought you might want this," she said. Eleanor took it, puzzled. Inside were Rachel's belongings from the evidence locker, Her necklace, a few bracelets, a flash drive. Eleanor turned the flash drive over in her fingers. "She was trying to get the truth out," Moreno said softly. "I think she wanted you to know in case anything ever happened." Eleanor nodded. Her hands were steady, finally. That night, she plugged the drive into her laptop. It contained videos. Rachel, sitting in her room, talking to the camera. Confessionals, like a private documentary. One video played automatically. "Hey, if you're watching this, I guess something went wrong. Maybe I'm gone, or maybe I just couldn't carry the weight anymore." Rachel stared into the camera, eyes puffy from crying. "I found out I'm not really a Collins. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I found the paperwork, the clinic records. It all made sense. Why I never felt like I fit. Why Mom always looked at me like I was fragile, like I might break." She looked away. "I'm not mad about the adoption. I mean, okay, I was. But mostly I'm mad about the lies. I think secrets are what really kill families. Not knives, not accidents. Secrets." She leaned forward. "If I disappear, don't trust anyone. Not Dad, not Caroline, not even Luke. Everyone's hiding something. Everyone wants to be seen as good, but we're all just scared animals, clawing to protect ourselves." Eleanor closed the laptop. She sat in the silence, tears streaming freely down her face. Not the tears of fresh grief, but something deeper. Grief for a daughter misunderstood, for a family broken, for a truth that came too late. She wrote another letter to Luke that night. This time she mailed it. "Dear Luke, I forgive you. I don't understand, not fully. I don't think I ever will. But you are my son, and I love you. Mom." The next morning she planted more flowers. The neighborhood eventually forgot. The headlines were replaced by newer tragedies. The Collins house remained quiet and plain and heavy with memory. Caroline returned after 6 months, healthier, softer. She hugged her mother for the first time in years. They talked late into the night, not about Rachel or Luke or Richard, but about what came next, whether healing was possible. "I want to write," Caroline said one evening. "Maybe about us, about what happened." Eleanor nodded. "Maybe someone will learn something." One spring afternoon, they visited Luke. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes still had that quiet watchfulness. They hugged for a long time. They cried. They talked about Rachel, about her laugh, her wit, her rage. Caroline gave him a journal. "Start writing," she said. "It helps." The three of them sat in the visitor's room until the guard called time. They didn't say goodbye. "Just see you soon." Back home, Eleanor walked through the rooms, touching the walls, the photographs, the spaces in between. The house had taken so much, but it had also held them through joy, through tragedy, through the unraveling. She opened all the windows. Let the wind cleanse the air. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that some broken things could be mended. Not perfectly, but honestly. 3 years passed. The Collins house no longer looked like a crime scene. The walls had been painted light gray, the furniture rearranged. A few photos remained on the mantel, Rachel among them. She wasn't forgotten, but she wasn't a ghost anymore either. Caroline had moved into a small apartment downtown. She worked part-time at a bookstore and had enrolled in a creative writing program. Her early drafts were clumsy, heavy-handed, but real. One of her essays, about grief, about what it means to be the sister of both a victim and a killer, was published in a local journal under a pseudonym. It went viral. Eleanor started volunteering at a domestic abuse shelter. Quiet work, humble. The women there trusted her, perhaps because she carried pain like they did, not loud but permanent. She never talked about her own story unless someone asked directly. And even then she only said, "I lost a daughter and found my way back to my son." Luke was transferred to a halfway house when he turned 18. He'd earned his GED, started therapy, and joined a carpentry program. He didn't talk much in the beginning. His new roommates gave him space, but eventually they found a rhythm. One of them, Jeremy, had done time for robbery and now taught Luke how to play guitar. They played soft blues late at night, and for the first time in years, Luke smiled without shame. One day, Caroline visited him with a printed manuscript in hand. "It's not perfect," she warned, placing it on the table between them. "But I wrote our story. Yours, mine, Rachel's. I didn't use names. But it's all there." Luke stared at the stack of paper. "Why?" "Because it hurt," she said, "and writing it made it hurt less." He nodded. Caroline didn't expect him to read it, but he did, slowly. Page by page, he underlined sentences, circled words, wrote comments in the margins. At the last page, he looked up. "You made her beautiful," he said. "She was," Caroline replied. That summer, a letter arrived at the halfway house. Luke opened it cautiously. Inside was a postcard, a photograph of an empty beach, a single seagull in flight. On the back, one line, "I think I'm ready to come home." Dad Luke stared at it for hours. When he finally showed it to Eleanor, she didn't seem surprised. "I've been expecting him," she said quietly. "He's always been the type to run first and heal later." They met Richard at a coffee shop on a Sunday afternoon. He looked thinner, his hair streaked with gray. He wore a jacket even though it was hot outside, and he held a folded newspaper like a shield. Luke didn't speak at first. Caroline watched them like a referee waiting for the first foul. "I'm sorry," Richard said. "I was a coward. I left when I should have stayed." Luke blinked slowly. "Why now?" "Because I've been watching you from afar, reading everything Caroline wrote, hearing from your mom. I didn't know if I had the right to come back, but I realized I had to try." Caroline snorted. "You always make it about you." Richard looked down. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "Just a chance to make amends, any way I can." Eleanor sipped her tea. "It's not about forgiveness," she said. "It's about whether we believe you're willing to live in the mess you helped create." "I am," he said. "Every day." Luke stood up. For a second, Richard tensed, expecting a blow. Instead, Luke stepped forward and hugged him, brief, stiff, but real. "We're not whole," Luke said, "but maybe we can build something new." That autumn, Eleanor invited them all for dinner. It was the first time they'd sat at the same table since Rachel's death. The house was filled with warm light. The table was set for 4. They cooked together. Caroline made the pasta, Eleanor prepared salad, Richard set the table, and Luke brought dessert. A store-bought cake with "one day at a time" scrawled in blue icing. There were awkward silences. Too many forks, nervous glances. But there was also laughter, real, cautious, healing. After dinner, they sat on the porch with mugs of tea, watching the leaves drift down like tiny parachutes. "I had a dream last week," Eleanor said. "Rachel was in it. She wasn't angry. She just watched us." "Do you think she'd forgive me?" Luke asked. "I think forgiveness doesn't always come in words," Eleanor replied. "Sometimes it's just the absence of hate." Caroline leaned her head on Luke's shoulder. "She'd want us to stop punishing ourselves." They sat in silence. That night, when everyone had left, Eleanor walked into Rachel's old room. It had been turned into a guest room, but she kept one drawer with her daughter's keepsakes. She opened it, pulled out Rachel's journal, and read one line before closing it. "If I don't survive this family, I hope they at least survive each other." Outside, the wind carried the last of the leaves across the lawn. The next day, Caroline called her publisher. "I'm ready to publish the book," she said, and when it finally came out, The House That Hurt Us. It resonated with thousands. Reviews called it raw, poetic, brutal, and necessary. Caroline was invited to speak at schools, recovery centers, even TEDx events. Luke sometimes stood at the back of the room, unseen, listening. He never spoke, but when people asked who the book was based on, Caroline only smiled and said, "Someone I love." A producer approached her about turning it into a series. She said no. "It's not entertainment," she explained. "It's survival on paper." On the anniversary of Rachel's death, they held a small gathering in the backyard. Just family, a few close friends. They planted a tree where the shed once stood, an oak sapling. "Let's give it a name," Richard suggested. Caroline stepped forward. "Let's call it Rachel." The sun slipped behind the clouds. The wind was calm. And for the first time since that horrible night, the Collins family stood together. Not whole, not healed, but hopeful. And that, in the end, was enough. Winter came with a quiet gentleness that year. Snow blanketed the old Collins house, muting the street sounds and making the world feel softer than it had in a long time. Inside, the fireplace crackled with warmth as Eleanor knit a scarf on the couch. Luke sat nearby, carving a small wooden bird from a block of cedar. Caroline typed on her laptop, her fingers dancing over the keys like a pianist, returning to a familiar melody. There were no decorations that December, no tinsel, no blinking lights. But there were small things: homemade hot cocoa, shared meals, long talks by the fire. It was enough. One afternoon, a letter arrived for Luke. He opened it slowly, expecting the usual halfway house correspondence or legal forms. Instead, it was from one of Rachel's old friends, Jenna. "Dear Luke, I didn't know if I should write to you, but I've been carrying this with me for years, and I want to say something I never got to say back then. I know what happened, and I also know it wasn't just about that night. We all failed Rachel. We saw things and said nothing. We watched you suffer too, and we did nothing. I'm sorry. For everything. For the silence. For the distance. For not being brave. I hope you find peace. I hope you forgive yourself. I hope you know she loved you. Even when it was messy. Even when it was hard." With kindness, Jenna Luke read the letter 3 times, then folded it and tucked it into his journal. Later that evening, he handed it to Eleanor. She didn't say anything, just held his hand for a long while. After the new year, Richard began attending therapy with Luke, not as a requirement, but as a choice. At first, their sessions were stiff. Richard struggled with vulnerability. He'd been taught that silence was strength, that emotion was weakness. But slowly, the walls began to crumble. "I think I was afraid of being seen," Richard confessed one day. "I knew I had failed as a father. I didn't want anyone to say it out loud." "You didn't just fail," Luke said. "You disappeared." Richard nodded. "I thought maybe disappearing would erase the damage." "It doesn't," Luke replied. "But showing up helps." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. There were days when Luke resented him all over again. Days when Richard reverted to old patterns. But they both kept showing up. That spring, the tree they planted in Rachel's name began to bloom. Small green leaves, fragile but determined. Eleanor tended to it daily, whispering things under her breath as she watered it. Caroline began writing a second book, not about the past, but about healing, about what it meant to rebuild from wreckage. She titled it Roots in the Ashes. Luke started teaching woodworking at a local youth center. Most of the kids came from difficult homes. They didn't trust adults, especially not men. But Luke didn't push. He taught them how to hold a chisel, how to shape something broken into something new. It was therapy disguised as craftsmanship. One boy, Marco, reminded him of himself at 13, quiet, angry, sharp around the edges. After 6 weeks, Marco handed him a tiny wooden heart. "For your sister," he mumbled. Luke held it like a sacred object. "Thank you." The Collins family began having Sunday dinners again. Sometimes they invited others. Jenna came once, then again, until she became a regular presence. Her guilt slowly gave way to connection. Other times it was just the four of them, eating in silence or laughter or tears. Whatever came, they let it be. Caroline's second book was nominated for a major literary prize. She didn't win, but the nomination changed everything. She started speaking at healing retreats and led workshops for survivors of trauma. "Writing doesn't fix you," she often said, "but it gives your pain a place to live outside your body." One evening, after a talk, a young woman approached her with trembling hands. "My brother hurt me," she whispered, "but I still love him. Is that wrong?" Caroline smiled sadly. "Number, that's human. Loving someone doesn't mean accepting the harm, but it means you see them as more than just the worst thing they did." The woman cried into Caroline's shoulder. In early summer, Eleanor received a letter from a woman named Ava. Ava had been a nurse at the juvenile center where Luke was once held. She had witnessed his first days there, silent, bruised, withdrawn. "I remember the day he finally spoke," she wrote. "He asked for a book, something about birds. I thought it was strange at the time, but now I understand. He wasn't looking to escape. He was looking to fly again. You should be proud of your son." Eleanor placed the letter in a frame and hung it in the hallway. Next to it, she placed a photo of Rachel from her 16th birthday, laughing, eyes full of life. The hallway became a place of memory and hope. That fall, the Collins family took a trip. Not far, just to the mountains a few hours away. They rented a cabin, went hiking, roasted marshmallows by a fire. There were moments of joy so pure that they felt like miracles, and moments of silence where each person drifted into their thoughts. Luke stood at the edge of a cliff one afternoon, wind in his hair, looking down at the trees. Caroline joined him. "Still think about her?" "Every day." "Me too." They didn't say anything else. They didn't have to. The final night in the cabin, Richard stood to make a toast. "I don't deserve a family like this," he began, "but I am endlessly grateful that you've let me be part of it again." They raised their glasses. "To Rachel," Eleanor said softly. "To us," Luke added. "To starting over," Caroline said. They clinked glasses and sat together in the warmth of the firelight. In the years that followed, they continued to grow, not without struggle, not without pain, but with intention. Luke eventually opened a small workshop, offering classes in both woodcraft and emotional recovery through art. Caroline published her third book, a novel this time, inspired by the idea that no family is too broken to try. Eleanor continued volunteering, becoming a mentor to women learning to live after loss. Richard worked with an organization that helped estranged fathers reconnect with their children. The house on Maple Street remained, older now, quieter, but no longer haunted. The tree in the backyard was tall, its branches strong, its leaves offering shade and shelter. And every year, on the anniversary of Rachel's death, they gathered there. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they laughed, sometimes they just sat in silence, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves. But they always came back. Because family, they had learned, isn't just made of love or blood. It's made of return, of repair, of the courage to sit with what is broken and still choose to stay. And in that choice every year, they found something close to peace, something like forgiveness, something like home.